Hey everyone, it's Vicky, and today I will be sharing with you two of the most exciting games I played at the Charlotte Chess Center this summer. I gained 87 ELO after going 3 for 3, which makes it the most ELO I've ever gained from a single tournament. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Now let's get started with game 1. For this game, I played with the white pieces. I went d4, my opponent went knight f6, and then I went bishop f4. Here my opponent surprised me a little bit because they went c5, which I don't very often see. Normally I see something like d5, but I do have some experience against this line because my brother used to play it a lot against me. So I played d5, my opponent went d6. I was considering what to do against b5. This is a kind of a more challenging line. But here the best move was f3 and to eventually go e4 and reinforce my pawn in the center. But in the actual game, after he went d6, I went c4, he went queen b6, and I went queen b3. This is a fine move, but what would have been better and given me a slight edge is to go queen c2 actually. And the idea here is to eventually go e4 like this. But instead, after I went queen b3, my opponent went g6, and I developed my knight, and we kept on developing our pieces. And then eventually they took on b3, I took back. My idea was always to take back and open up my file for my rook, which I like doing a lot. Anyway, my opponent went knight a6. I thought about what to do here for a while. I wasn't really sure because the knight is hopping to b4 and I needed some way to counteract the threat of going knight c2 after that. So I decided to go bishop d3, which I think is a great move. My other option that I was thinking about doing for a little moment was to go knight b5. But the problem with this is that they can go knight b4 anyway, and if I go check and win the rook like this, they're just going to win my rook like this. And after everything's settled, they're gonna take this pawn and escape with their knight while my knight here is kind of trapped. So that would have not been good, which is why I played my move to now if they go knight b4, which they did, I can retreat my bishop back to b1, and even though my bishop is a little sad right now, at least I am blocking all of the entry squares for the black knight. Okay, so my opponent castled, I developed my other knight, and we just kept on playing a few more moves here. I decided to retreat my bishop back to e3. I thought of maybe having ideas with f4 and f5 in the future, and I didn't really want to give up my bishop for the knight. So that's why I went there. And we just kept on maneuvering. Here I was quite proud that I found the move f4. Normally I'm not very aggressive in my playing style, but I thought that I had some good ideas with f5 and maybe eventually also g4, attacking the knight and just expanding. So my opponent went f5 himself, and here I played e5, which is quite a tricky move. My opponent was about to take this pawn over here, but this would have been a mistake because I could take this pawn and then the knight and the other pawn is attacked. But unfortunately, my opponent thought about it again and played rook c8. So here I went for e6, the best move. It's right now a slight edge for white just because I have more space and it seems that I am the one attacking. My opponent had to retreat. And here I brought out my knight. I wasn't really sure what to do here. I was just kind of maneuvering my knights. This knight back to e1 was kind of dubious, but I wasn't sure what to do. Apparently my best move here is to retreat with my bishop again. But yeah, I wouldn't have done that. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this, but these were 20 plus 10 games. So they were both quick and classic regular rated. But yeah, after I moved my knight back, my opponent was able to go knight g4. And after I moved my bishop back, I didn't see this immediately, but my opponent went bishop d4 check, and this is a little frightening. I only have one move here, which is to go back with my king, but now my opponent's able to win the exchange. However, I thought I still had some good compensation because I have some good knights and the bishop pair still, so I was still fighting. I went knight f3, this was the best move and pretty much the only move that is still equalizes here, which is kind of fascinating how I'm down in exchange, but it's still 0-0. My opponent went b5. This is apparently also the best move, but here I was able to find a key resource. I went knight d1, attacking this bishop over here, and if this bishop moves, for instance, to here, I could just take it with my knight, and if they take back, I'll take this knight. So my opponent found the best move here, which is to take the pawn, and then I took the bishop and take this pawn, and that way at least they're gaining some pawns while I regain my piece. But now I have 2 pieces for the rook, which I'm quite happy about. So I took the knight, and then I moved my bishop here just to centralize it and attack this pawn on a6. My opponent played bishop b5, which is dubious because now I can take and my opponent has tripled pawns. I don't think you ever want to have tripled pawns, but in this case, I'm pretty happy about this because it's slightly better for white. I like my knights and I have this open file for my rook still on the a file. My opponent, well, I played knight d3. I was attacking this pawn on b4, so my opponent defended it with the rook. I went rook d1, which is apparently dubious. My best move would have been rook a7 and just not fearing if they double their rooks like this because there's no threat here. If they check, I'll take with my knight and check, and then I block with my other knight, so there's nothing to be feared. But I played a little bit safe. I played this. My opponent played rook a8, and actually, they lost on time here before they were able to play the move. So that was quite interesting. I do think that white is quite a bit better here, even though the engine says it's only plus 0.6. White, it looks like they have all of the winning chances. The knight maneuvers are quite strong and especially powerful in time pressure. For my second game, I played with the black pieces this time, and my opponent opened with c4. And this is the English. I'm not a huge fan of it, and as you'll see, this game got quite interesting really quickly. So I responded with the most principled move of e5, and then we developed our knights. And then my opponent went g3 to fianchetto the bishop. I went bishop b4, and then I took the knight on c3. This is always a plan here because even though I give up the bishop pair, I at least can ruin my opponent's pawn structure. So after my opponent took back, I went d6 to reinforce the pawn on e5. My opponent did a similar thing by going d3 to reinforce the c4 pawn, and then we both castled. Now here I went bishop d7, but I should have gone e4 to at least attack the knight, and then something like this could have happened. This is equal, but with a lot of chances for both sides. Instead, my opponent now could play e4 himself, and my pieces here are a little more cramped. I went h6 to prevent the bishop from going to g5. My opponent started to reroute his knight, and I went rook e8. I didn't have a clear plan here. I thought that maybe I could start attacking the pawns on c3 and a2, but I didn't have a clear way of doing that, so it was harder for me to form a plan than my opponent, who could just pawn storm on the king side. So that's what my opponent did. He went f4. I brought my bishop to attack the queen. He blocked, and I went b6. This is kind of slow. I wasn't really sure what I was doing here. I thought maybe if I moved my knight to a5, at least it would be protected. But here my opponent could kick out my bishop. I had to go back and go f5 and just continue expanding and eventually just attack with the pawns and the other pieces toward my king. So I moved my knight back to at least try and get some reinforcements over there. But it was not very good here because it's only my opponent attacking and me trying to defend. I moved my knight to at least try and get some counterplay going. Maybe rerouting it to c5 was an option, but my opponent just kept on bringing the attack. I tried to trade knights, which my opponent accepted, but here they were able to bring their queen in, and it got quite scary for me. I was just trying to hold on for my dear life here. I'm pretty sure I already had 5 minutes or under 5 minutes at this point, which meant I could stop notating, but my opponent still had over 10 minutes, so it was looking a little bit dire. Anyway, here's what happened. I tried to get my bishop out to maybe attack the pawn on d3, My opponent just kept pushing his pawn. I finally attacked that pawn, but then they could just go back. So now I had to go back too, and it was not looking good for me here. It's +2 for a white, and my king is very unsafe. So my new plan was to try and evacuate my king and get it toward the queen side. So this is what I tried to do. First, I had to move my queen away so that it wouldn't get trapped. And then I went f6 to try and blockade the position at least a little bit with my pawns. But my opponent kept up the pressure. So I went king f7, which is the best move here. My king is finally running, and hopefully it will find a safe home all the way on the right. My opponent kept pushing his pawn. I took once, and then I went rook g8. Obviously, my opponent can't take again, or shouldn't take again, because then my rook would be lining up with the queen. Here, my opponent found his best move, which is also to run away with the king. This is kind of an insane position, but I kept on running, which is also the best move here. My opponent got the open file, but I just kept on trying to at least preserve what little of this position I still had. At least right now, it's the worst of it, I would say, is done. It's still +1.5 for white, but at least I'm not immediately getting checkmated. This is what happened. I moved my king away, tried to do something with my knight, but my opponent just took it. And here they went d4, which I thought was quite interesting. I took with the c pawn, and then I took again. My opponent didn't find the best move here, so at least I was able to protect my pawn, but this is a big mistake because now my opponent can go e5 and my rook is attacked, so I had to move that. Here my opponent went e6 and I went queen e7 to at least try and blockade the pawn, but that was not good because it allowed my opponent to go rook h8, and then I had to start running away with my king again, so I went king c7. And this is where my opponent went wrong. My opponent gave me a check with his queen because we both had so low time, and that felt like the most intuitive thing to do. But this allowed me to be able to block with my own queen, and now my opponent pretty much had to trade queens because, or else I would be taking the rook on h8. So this is what happened. My opponent took, and here I'm actually better because I am up a pawn and I have more winning chances with the passed pawn on d4. My opponent made another mistake by going g6, but I didn't find the best move here, which was going bishop c2 and attacking this pawn on f5. Instead, I wanted to trade the bishops and simplify the position even more, which is what happened. Here it is equal again, but still very complicated, and I felt like if anyone was better here, it would be me. This is what happened. My opponent went a4, I moved my king up, I moved my king back, so to blockade the pawn on e6 from moving further, and I took the open file. We just continued maneuvering our pieces a little bit, trying to poke and prod. My opponent now played a5, which is a mistake because I could go rook f4 and start picking up all of these pawns. So that is what happened. My opponent took, I took back, and then I was able to win the pawns on f5 and on e6. And now this is already over because soon I'm going to win the g pawn and then promote my pawns. Although it was still a little bit tricky here. I think at one point I still blundered a draw over here. Actually, if my opponent had gone king e4, it would have been a draw because I don't have a good way of protecting my f4 pawn. But luckily my opponent did not do that. They went back with the king, and I was able to smoothly convert this position. I'll just let it play out from now because it was a lot of maneuvering. We stopped notation quite a long time ago, so this is just all by my memory. This is what happened. I just started moving my king up, cutting off the king, and then trying to promote my pawn like this. And then my opponent resigned over here. That's it for today's video. Let me know what you thought of it, and I can't wait to be playing more now that I'm in college. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye!